Hello, in today's video we will be creating a slot machine application. That is a very simple application, but that covers a few concepts that we have seen so far. The first thing we will do is to change the background color on our form. We'll change it to black. Then we will add in an image. So that is a slot machine picture that we have available. And see here that we have this image layout set to stretch. That way the image fits nicely on our form. Then we go ahead and save. The next thing we will do is to add in some labels. And those labels would represent the numbers that would show up on our slot machine. For our labels, we need to change the back color. We will change it to transparent. We will then change the name of the label. We'll call this one numLabel1. We will change the text of the label to the number 9 for now. And now we want to change the font of the label. Maybe Terry should work. Alright, so that looks nice. We're going to copy and paste this label, create a second and a third label. We want to change the name of our second and third labels. So this one is going to be numLabel2, which obviously will include our second number. And then the third label would be numLabel3. Then to play the game we need to create a button. So we'll go ahead and do that. For this button we will also change the image. We'll use the play button, which is just a triangle, and we need to change the layout of our image to stretch, and then we need to change the background. We might want to make our button a little bit smaller to fit, and then we don't need the text. Because obviously by clicking on that button the user knows that they are about to play the game. Alright, now let's change the background code for that button. Let's change our button name first. We'll call it the play button. And note here that when you change the button name after you double click on the button to create the method, you might have to manually go back and modify the name of the method. So the next thing that we need to do is to create some variables. Okay, so we're going to create some integer variables, and we'll call our variables num1, num2, and num3. And these numbers represent every single number that's going to appear on our slot machine. Now, what we would like to do is to create a random variable. We'll call it rand. This is a new random variable. Now, what we want is to assign a random variable to each one of our variables num1, num2, and num3. And this is the way to do it. We'll go rand.next. We're going to use the next method. And then in between parentheses, we're going to enter a number, and this number includes the max number that will be generated by this rand, or by this rand.next method. For this specific game, we will need our random number to be between 0 and 9. So when we set this number here, this argument to 10, our rand.next method will return a number between 0 and 9. And that is exactly what we need for the game. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing for our other numbers. And note here that even though the statement looks the same, we will be generating different numbers for each one of our variables. The next thing that we would like to do is to set our labels here. Alright, that looks better. Let's go back to our form. Here, these are our labels, and these are the ones that would need to include our random numbers. So num label 1 dot text would include our num1, and remember here that we need to convert it into a string before we can assign it to the label text. We'll do the same thing for the other labels. Alright, let's try this. So here the user clicks on the play button and our numbers appear. Looks great. Now we need to set a rule that specifies how the user wins. So the first thing we will do is to create our number. So we will set a new variable, and we will call it temp, and our variable will include these strings that we have displayed over here. So we will take the text displayed in every label, and we will concatenate those texts together to give us a number that represents the number that has been provided to the user. So that is our string. We can print it and see how it looks like. This should be a string. Alright. So now this is our string. It includes the number 255, but this is still a string and it's not an integer variable. So what we need to do next is to create an integer variable, and we'll call it final, and that would include the actual number that is represented by our string. The way to do that is to parse our temp variable into an integer. Okay, and now you're wondering, why are we doing all of this? Well, because we need this number to specify a rule. It is much easier to specify rules using numbers instead of strings. So using the final variable, we can set up any rule. We can say, for example, if final is equal to 666, then we can display a message saying that the user has won. And then if any other number appears, then we can say that the user has lost. Message, so we can use this message box now, and then set it to you lose. There we go. So if we go back and read this rule, here it says that if our final number, that is the number that is represented in our three labels, if that number is equals to 666, then the user wins. Otherwise, the user loses. So let's go ahead and try that. Alright. So it seems to be working fine, except that for user to win is 1 out of 1,000. So we can set a different rule to increase the probability that the user would win. So we can set the rule to be, if final is greater than 600, for example, then the user would win, otherwise the user would lose. So here the user has lost since we got 205, 280, but we still got a 60% chance of winning. So now we won. Alright, so that has been very simple. We simply created some random variables, we assigned them to our labels, then we concatenated all of those labels to create a string. We parsed that string into an integer variable, and then we created a rule using an if-then statement. Okay, now the next thing that we will do is a little bit more fancy. We're going to use a loop to set these labels. So let's pay attention here just for a little while and see how that's going to work. So in here we're going to be creating a for loop, and our for loop, you're going to see that it's going to save all of this space right here. So all of these statements will be replaced by our for loop. And see here how we have three different variables, so we know that our for loop needs to iterate three times. So we're going to be creating an int I that we're going to set to 1. Note here that we started by 1 and not 0, and I'll mention why in a few seconds. Okay, so here we have our variable going from 1 through 4. That would still iterate 3 times, and we selected the number 1 because we're going to use that I variable to create the name of our variables right here. Okay, so we need to start by 1 to create a variable num label 1, and num label 2 for I equals 2, and then num label 3 we're going to be using the value of the I when it's set to 3. So what we're trying to do here is to create a variable name. So instead of writing code for each specific label, we're going to have to write just only one line of code that would generate or that would replace all of these lines of codes. So the first thing we will do is to create a variable called var name. That is a string variable. Our var name will be equal to the word num label. So that is this word right here. We're trying to form this name right here, plus I. And note here that I is an integer, so we need to convert it into a string. Let's print our var name and see how it looks like. So the first value for our var name is num label 1, which is exactly what we needed. The second one is num label 2. The third one is num label 3. And then we exit the loop. So our var name includes the name of our control. Now this is a little bit fancy, but it is not too hard to understand. This is what we're going to do. We're going to create a temp label. So this is a label that we are dynamically creating through the code, and this label would contain the value of the labels that we have created on our form. And let's see how we can do that. So we know here that our form is called Form 1. We're going to be looking for the active form. This is the form that is showing up dynamically or running or executing. In this active form, what we are looking for are our controls. So we're going to be getting our control list. And then within our controls, we need to find the one that is called var name. So we simply right here include our variable. Then we need to give it a true argument. This true simply means we need to look everywhere in all of our controls and children of our controls to find our label. And then here we're going to add this index right here. This is because this statement might return several controls and we're looking for the first one. And now we need to convert or to cast our control into a label. So just make sure that we are returning a label. Okay? Let's save. Now what we want to do is to set the text of our new label to a random number. And we want the random number to be less than 10. So let's see how that works. We're going to comment out all of these lines of code. And let's review what we just did right here. Let's first convert into a string. And a quick review here. We created a for loop that goes from 1 to 4. We're creating a variable that will contain the name of our label. So our label is called numLabel1, numLabel2, numLabel3. So our var name, so this is the name of our label that we are creating, is containing our numLabel string and the I, which is our number that we're using right here for our loop. Next, what we are trying to do is to find the control on our form that is called numLabel1 or 2 or 3. So this statement right here simply returns that label. Then we assign that label to a temp label. We set the text of that temp to a random number less than 10. We give it an argument of 10 that we then convert into a string. So what this loop would do, it would automatically go ahead and modify our 3 labels in one simple step. Let's see how that works. We have an error. This is our temp label. So we'll just change the name since we can't use the same variable name for 2 variables. And let's start. Alright, and our application still works. I hope this has been both fun and helpful, and see you next time.